Tennessee is probably one of the best places on the planet to keep bees, especially in East Tennessee. There's a fact that most people don't appreciate, that is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park has a greater diversity of plant species than any place on the planet, any other place, more so than the Amazon rainforest. My name's Howard Kerr and I live in Maryville, Tennessee, and I have a company called Smoky Mountain Honey Company, and I've been keeping these bees and operating this business for 51 years. When I was a little boy, about 5 or 6 years old, my next door neighbor had a couple hives of bees, and they were in the field right beside my house. And when Mr. Hitch would come home from work every day, he would sit down on a log next to his beehives and watch them. And being a nosy little critter, I decided to go over and see what Mr. Hitch was doing. And I went over and said, "What are you looking at, Mr. Hitch?" And he said, "I'm watching my bees." And so he started showing me about carrying pollen, and then he'd open the hive and get some honey out and let me taste honey. And that sort of got me hooked on bees. And all my life I wanted to have bees. And so in 1965 I decided I'm going to have bees, and that's when I started keeping the bees. So I've been having them ever since. And started off, I wanted 2 hives of bees to make honey for my breakfast table. And 51 years later, I've been running a beehive business with up to 300 colonies of bees. There are those who say I'm the bee expert in the state of Tennessee. I won't defend that statement, but I've spent a lot of time teaching classes. I've taught beekeeping at university. I've done research on honeybees at Oak Ridge. I've done a lot of bee diagnostics with microscopes looking for various problems with bees. And I still teach a lot of classes and give a lot of lectures on bees. And I've spoken at national and international meetings on bees. So if you're a beekeeper very long, you learn how to handle the bees so you don't get stung. I don't wear gloves. I always wear a veil. It's smart to wear a veil anytime. I don't care who it is. But I don't wear gloves. And one of the benefits of not wearing gloves is I can feel the frames, I can feel the hive. Now, if I mash a bee, it'll sting me just like it would sting anybody else. But you also learn a few tricks, like the smoker. I smoke my hands before I go into bees. I get some beeswax and handle it, and the bees will get on my hand and it smells like a beehive to them, so they just go on. This behind me is what I call one of my production yards. They sit here to produce honey, and they pollinate my garden. And I've got fruit trees in the front, fruit trees in the back, garden here, garden there, a lot of garden space. And these bees will pollinate those things, but they also make a lot of honey. I've got other bee yards on farms that are dual purpose. They're there to pollinate some crops and also to make some honey. These bees just came back from South Georgia. I moved them to South Georgia right after Thanksgiving. They go down to South Georgia because they get a honey flow startup down there earlier, and you can increase the number of colonies down there. And then when our flow is ready to start up here, which it did about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I moved the bees back here. The rest of the time the bees stay put where they're located, and I go there and take care of them, mow the bee yards, check them out, harvest the honey. We harvest the honey mainly in late June because we have to take the honey off here before we can pick these bees up and move them to the mountains. So we have the extracting room set up, cleaned up, get all the equipment. We take the honey off. We spend 2 days around the clock extracting honey. The most popular honey is Clover honey by far, and it's sort of like mama's cooking. That's what we've produced in this area predominantly for years and years, and that's what most people around here have been accustomed to, and that's why they like it. But frankly, I've never met a honey I didn't like, so I eat all the honeys that we have. I have right now 6 tanks down there with different flavors of honey, depending on the floral source. And if you go through and taste each of those barrels of honey, you'll taste this totally different spectrum of flavors. Buying the honey is not the most important thing about honeybees. Honey is a very good sweetener and tastes very good, and I love honey very much. But what's important about bees is that they pollinate 8 out of 10 foods that we eat. Except for wind-pollinated crops like the grains, wheat, oats, and so forth, those the wind pollinate. Most of the crops we consume, honeybees have their nose stuck in the production of that fruit. If you have an apple tree with a beautiful bloom and a bee doesn't visit that apple bloom, you will not have an apple. And so, same things with cucumbers, squash, cantaloupes, watermelons, pumpkins, all the plants you grow in your garden. We've got 26,000 acres of home gardens in Tennessee. And if they don't have bees around, they don't produce much crop. One of the big concerns about beekeepers have now is what's called colony collapse disorder. You go out in October, you have a hive of bees that's absolutely bursting with bees, plenty of food, good cover on those, they're not going to get wet. You expect, for decades, you go back in March and those bees are doing great. Well, now what happens, you go back in February or March to check on your bees and you open the hive and voila, no bees at all, it's empty. Got plenty of honey, dry inside. We really don't know what's causing it. Everybody's got their own conjecture as to what's causing it. I think my personal opinion is I think it's genetically based, but it's also the perfect storm of bad genetic situation. So we've been passing our breeder queens around so that our bees are more or less inbred now, and that's not good. We have a lot of pesticides. There's some neonicotinoid pesticides that are extremely toxic to honeybees, and they affect their nervous system in a way that I suspect when the bees are afflicted with that pesticide, they leave the hive to go out foraging, and it's sort of like an Alzheimer's person. They leave, but they can't remember where home is. I have customers that come from several counties here because a lot of the allergists who recommend people eat raw, local, unfiltered honey, and I have a reputation as having that honey, and I get people coming from 2 and 3, 4 counties away coming in here to buy honey. And they'll come in and buy 2 or 3 cases of honey and then come back a few months later and buy 2 or 3 cases more. It's my fishing and golfing all rolled into beekeeping. I can come out here and start working, and honestly, I can't tell you if I've been there an hour or 3 hours. I just get lost in time. It's so enjoyable for me to be out there and watch and see.